More than 60 years ago, ordinary citizens from all walks of life met the challenge of an epic world-changing event head-on to galvanize a legacy that lives on to this day. Join us as we span the time frame of the Second World War. Visit with these extraordinary men and women who have sacrificed and dedicated themselves to a calling that was undeniable. Hear from them as they tell their remarkable stories of heroism, of fallen brothers, and how they served as they answered the call to be duty-bound. Today we have Staff Sergeant Randy Richmond Jr., who is a veteran of World War II and was part of the Army's 413th Infantry Regiment, 104th Timberwolves Infantry Division. Randy fought in France, Belgium, and Holland. We are going to hear first-hand experiences of a combat fighting soldier, experiences that are both chilling and remarkable. The transformation of a carefree Tulane college student with a life ahead of him to choose as he pleased. Instead, this veteran chose to be duty-bound and join the Army. We will hear his experiences in combat, his friendship with his fellow servicemen, witnessing things that a young man should never have to see or participate in. This is the first of a two-part interview. Staff Sergeant Richmond.
Actually, I graduated on my birthday, my 18th birthday, June the 5th, 1941. I was about 19 when I went in. I heard the President's address.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
And a lot of people were in the Naval ROTC, and my father and parents were shocked. And of course I was able to do it. I was old enough. From boot camp, I went to New York, and I went to NYU, the Uptown School in Engineering. And my parents came up to New York and visited me asked me about, you know, how was boot camp? I said, well, boot camp is very hard. And I went in, I weighed 165 pounds, and I came out, I weighed about 140. So it was probably good for me. We had a very cold welcome when we got there. They had this huge man, Captain Lutnidge, which was the commander of Company B, and he weighed about 300 pounds, all muscle, about 6'4", 6'5". And he said, you've been having an easy time ensconced in New York City. He said, well, those days are over with. He said, you get no passes for the next 2 months. And we're going to have extra duty at night, and etc. And he said, it was a very cold welcome. He said, if you have any disagreement at all, he said, I take these railroad tracks, that's the 2 things of a captain, behind cabin 3. And he said, you can express your dissatisfaction. But he said, you're liable to get the hell beat out of you. And I thought at the time, I said, boy, what a place to come into. I mean, you know. So, but later on, Captain Lutnidge and I became very, very friendly. And I scored expert in the BAR and M1, and that attracted a lot of attention because almost nobody in the company was able to do that. And that's why I was given the expert infantry badge in a ceremony. And the funny thing is, none of the the commander handed it out, the commander of the 104th Infantry Division, but we had Stimson, I think, who was the Secretary of the Army, was there. And it was a ceremony where he gave these expert infantry badges, which you had a stipend of $5 a month, you know. But not many people got it, so it was really quite something. And we went in a huge convoy, I think of 160 ships or something like that. And it was a kind of rough sort of thing because we had to carry what they call a horseshoe roll. And it weighed about 80, 85 pounds. And we left Camp Kilmer, I believe it was, and we boarded a train for a little way, and then got on ferries, and then we ferried over to the harbor in New York, almost a mile, and we had these heavy horseshoe roll packs, so it was kind of, by the time we got on board the ship, and then they had little sort of like hammocks, about 3 or 4 of them, and I thought, my God, and I was down on the 4 or 5 decks down. We kept going down and etc. And what they were doing is they were putting a regiment on aboard the ship. We sailed the next morning. So most of us kind of went to sleep for an hour or 2. But then we were allowed on deck to play cards, to do whatever. We only had 2 meals. And we were in this convoy, and so they had a lot of armed ships and etc. And in a way, we didn't realize it at the time, but it was a better arrangement to do it that way, to have these huge convoys. So we were on the ship about, I'd say 8 or 10 days. And we landed at Cherbourg. And Cherbourg had just been liberated. As a matter of fact, parts of Cherbourg were being fought over when we landed, and we had to climb down the side of the thing with a rope arrangement. With the heavy packs and the weapon, and we didn't have ammunition given to us, but we had everything else, and it was really, I remember one man and our unit fell and hit the concrete, was killed because I guess when you go down the rope thing, people step on your hands and everything else, you know, but the best thing to do is just grin and bear it. I mean, because you don't want to do anything because you got your feet and your hands there. But anyway, it's a good thing to let you know that you're going to go into some hard times. We got off the ship and walked and rode to almost near the beaches. I'm talking about Utah and Omaha Beach, the invasion beaches. And we stayed there for about 2 or 3 days. It rained like hell, I remember that, and we were just living in the rain. And it was really a messed up arrangement. Then after that, we did a march over to Barneyville, which was where you cross the Cotentin Peninsula. It was 35 miles. So we made the largest march in the history of the division. It was 30, actually, depending on where you stopped, ours was 36 miles. And you had to be in pretty good shape to take all of that heavy arrangement that you have and do that in one day. We started at about 5 o'clock in the morning and got there at about 7 or 8 o'clock. And of course, most of us knew that you, on hard marches, you never eat or drink too much, just water, because it doesn't work out. I mean, you need everything that you have. You can't have food in your stomach and the blood goes to that to digest it. You don't want anything like that. So we knew better. And when we got to the orchard after a day of that, the 36 miles, they was serving coffee and hot chocolate. So we took the hot chocolate, drank it, and it came up, boom, just as fast as it went down. And we didn't, Harry Loving and I were going to be together, pitch out the tent. And we said, hell, we're not going to pitch the tent. So we in the orchard, and we went to sleep there. And boy, we wake up the next morning, boy, just as sore as we could be, and soaking wet. The dew had come down and etc. It was really terrible and cold. Man, it was colder than hell. And this was September. So, you know, there were no bathing facilities on the ship that you could use. There were too many people. You only served 2 meals. They served a sort of a breakfast and a late lunch. And there were long lines to get to it and etc. So that was that part. Well, we realized that things were happening very fast, because all of this really takes place in a very short period of time. But we were trained, the boot camp we went through was pretty rough at Camp Hood, later on Fort Hood. It was an armored division area, but they brought in infantry because that's what they really needed. And they were looking forward to heavy, heavy casualties with D-Day, you see. And of course, that's what they did have. I'd say from the time we climbed down the arrangement, we actually had an action in Bonneville where the Germans came over from the Channel Islands and were raising hell with the units and the French farmers. And so we were there at Bonneville for about a week, and they came over one night and we tore them to pieces. And they never made, that ended there, the Germans ever, of course not many of them got out alive. That was our first action, and we killed a large number of them. And I personally did, because I had a BAR at that time. Captain Lutledge he was alongside of me. He said, Richmond, you stay with me. and I liked him, but he was a hard man. And and he was right that you know, as I had scored expert in this weapon, he wanted me to be around him, and that was fine with me because I liked the guy. We were known as night fighters, and well, of course we did attacks in the day, but we did a lot of attacks at night. And it takes it's an unusual sort of thing, because remember, you have to have commands and you have to have people moving forward and doing jobs and etc. And it's in the dark. I mean, you don't have lights or anything else. So, and you're taking casualties. And you also hopefully giving some casualties back to the Germans. But we had trained at night, and so we were pretty well prepared for it. Didn't make too difference. I was mainly interested in doing what Captain Lutton had said. And, you know, I was more worried about that than I was about killing somebody. That's the way it was, sort of a kill or be killed idea. And we were told that from the start, that if you hesitated, you were going to be killed. As you go along in combat, when you first go in, you think that's going to be the other guy that's going to be wounded or be killed. As you go along, where you're not eating properly, you're not having hot meals. You're mainly existing off of rations, which are not really, you know, and you might go a week without a hot meal. And that's, you know, it was, and you had sleeping in foxholes and other things like that. It was a big draw on, you had to have a lot of young men in really excellent physical conditions to even absorb some of this. You couldn't have men in their 30s or 40s. It just wouldn't. Most of the officers we had were younger men. The worst engagement started to come after the 3 months of action, where I was suffering with dysentery, pneumonia, and frostbitten feet, and I had lost. I'd gone from 165 to about 115, 118 pounds, and a very savage individual, not a psycho. You're dealing with a very, very dangerous person. There's not much conversation or this, that, and the other, and it's you turn into a very different person. So, and I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, because if you ask me a question like in this, what we're speaking about, I have to identify what portion of the combat I'm in, because if you catch me at the end of it, when you ask me about what's the worst engagement, well, it was really in the parts where you are not in mentally or physically in good shape. But you're a very dangerous person. I mean, you know, which is good. I mean, you fire into somebody real fast. The man comes up to you, he's got his hands, he looks at you the wrong way, you shoot him. It's a terrible, terrible thing. But what I'm saying, you're from the young man that climbed down the rope ladder in Cherbourg, and this man, almost 3 months later, completely different individual. Actually, in combat, I've heard a lot of stories back and forth where God tells, I got 168 days online. I said, yeah, in the quartermasters. But you don't have it online. I mean, because some guys can't hack it for one day. Some people might hack it for a week. Some people hack it for a month. You have the rare guy who is 3 or 4 months. And then when you get past that, that's highly unusual. Highly. The man, the most decorated soldier in the 3rd Infantry Division, he started off in North Africa and went all the way through into France. But he'd been wounded 2 or 3 times, and he was a certain type of individual. Audie Murphy. And that's really an unusual thing. I mean, he was a country boy, hardened and etc., and able to take a lot of things. He had a rough life before he got in the Army, whereas a lot of us didn't have that rough life. So he was prepared for it. Even today, it's the most amazing thing to me is that here we are 65 years later, and we're still talking and thinking about it every day. I never pass a day that I don't think something about combat time. And when I go to bed at night, I dream, and a lot of times when I have a disturbing dream, it's always something in combat. I never said anything to anybody about the Army because I had misgivings. I thought, I'm certainly not going to tell people how many people I killed. I mean, that's not the sort of conversation at the dinner table or anywhere. And so as a result, the first times back, I'd say the first 10 or 15 years, never mentioned. As a matter of fact, a few people said, Randy, I never knew you were in the Army. It's absolutely, you have to have discipline, because what happened was discipline takes over. The training takes over. And that's better, because you don't have to think. You react. And the faster you react, the better. I'm going through a lot of things now that most people don't talk about. Well, the replacement's not really accepted until he goes through a learning period, and where he's able to assist, because that's where the camaraderie is. It's where you can depend on somebody. And when you say depend on somebody, it's not like who picks up a check at a restaurant. You're talking about, if you depend on this man, you put your life in his hands. And he does the same. That's a camaraderie. And it's a very strong one. The next thing was, they had a broad field with and some Germans with machine guns were firing. And so I climbed up this arrangement and peered in the thing, and I fired off 2 or 3 shots. I had an M1 then. And I couldn't tell whether I hit them or not, but they turned around and did the next thing. They turned the machine gun in the direction of mine, and they splattered the what you call it, hit my helmet, tore the netting on it, and creased it. And I slid back down to the road and said, I'm hit. And so they called the medic, and then Captain Lutnitz came up, you know, the company command. He said, Richmond, are you trying to be the first soldier kissed by you know, the people? And I said, well, and he said, did you hit anybody? I said, well, I don't know. I said, but I got some action though. And that was the reason I tell that story, because, you know, I was eager and doing things that a replacement would do, you know. You fire on a machine gun nest like that, yeah, I mean, hell, they're going to turn the machine gun on you. You know that. And so that was one of the first things. So we all had a good laugh. And that was one of the last times that we had something to really laugh about for the next few months. few weeks. Because after that, we started going into heavy action. Actually, the next day with the same, I'm sure it was the same group with the machine gun. Lutney said, I want 3 of you in Richmond, you go up through the center and let the other 2 guys go on the side and take out the machine gun thing. Well, that sounded all right. And the only thing was that they didn't bother with the guys to the side. They were only firing at me. And I had to finally get behind a big thing of turnips. And I didn't know they were turnips. And they were firing into the turnips. And I couldn't get around it to fire at them. But the other people finally, with all the time spent with me, and I'm dodging, I'm not firing my weapon because I can't. Every time I went to duck around to fire it, they were loading up on the turnips, which the turnips were saving my life, really, was what it was. And they finally threw a grenade into the nest. But they were concentrating on me, so I didn't realize it at the time. I thought, well, maybe I'm not doing the right thing, you know? But Lutney said, you did all right. He said, do you like turnips? I said, yeah, I guess I do now. And so that's for the first few hours of combat where you could laugh about it. But then after that, it starts getting more serious. Tech sergeant came over and said, Richmond, take Loving and you 2 go over and check out that farmhouse over there. And he said, remember, we're in Holland and can't throw grenades around, anything like that. You have to be very careful. But he said, I want the house checked out, though. I told him, take your safety off, and removed our safety as we were walking over to about 200 yards to the farmhouse. And when we got there, it was very quiet, and an unnatural quiet. And I knocked on the door very quietly, and a woman opened it, and she could barely speak English, and she said, there are Germans in the barn, and they have been taking my chickens and this and that and the other and etc. How many? She said, 3. So we left and went, and they had a large bush. So Harry and I trying to figure out whether we ought to go in there or wait for them to come out. In the meantime, a man comes out with a burp gun and he unzippers his trousers to have a call to nature, and he puts the burp gun on the side and etc. And at that time, I said, Handy Hock, which is hands high. He turned around in a flash, grabbed the gun, and almost had it pointed at us. And then we shot him. And he fired off 2 shots, and I got off 2 or 3, and we killed him. And he just screamed when the bullets were hitting him. And we were about, I'd say 10 yards away. I said, well, check him out to be sure he's dead, Harry, and I'll go in the barn. And got in the barn, and they had 2 very large soldiers there with no weapons or anything. I made them take the helmets off, and I did a quick rundown with them and everything. And then, because they were worried, they had heard the shots out there, they were worried that somebody was going to shoot them. And so I brought them out, and I remember turning the guy over that we shot, and I took the, He was a sergeant. He had decorations on. I took them off, and I still have them today. And that was a new experience, because very close up to kill somebody. And it did make a difference. And you have to act fast. I learned that, because he turned around really fast and I gave the burp gun to the tech sergeant because he could use it, because we weren't allowed to have other weapons like that, because you didn't have very much ammunition and etc. But he could get them, and officers the same way. But we brought the two soldiers back, and he said we're going to have to take them to battalion headquarters. Well, battalion headquarters was about an hour back, and I mean, you obviously in a country with a lot of Germans and also mines. So my face kind of fell. I said, "We haven't, Leaf, we haven't eaten, and we haven't dug a foxhole yet." And one guy said, "I'll take them." And I thought, well, and I said, "Is that all right?" He said, "Sure, that's all right." So he gives them to this guy. And I had misgivings about it. I told Harry Loving, I said, whoa. I said, his buddy was just killed last week. And boy, he's got a big for Germans. And he came back in about a half an hour, and the tech sergeant asked him, what are you doing back? Where are the men? He said, they tried to escape and we shot them. And boy, tech sergeant told him, let's don't say anything. There's no officers around, and you better not let an officer hear you shot somebody like that, because they need to have those people brought there to find out information from them. That's the whole idea. And we know the reason, and this, that, and the other. He said, and from then on, they said, don't give this guy because he'll never get there alive. And that made a change too. I mean, killing the man that shot Watchcomb and then having the two people being killed. You're responsible for 3 people being killed. Actually, this is the last big area in Holland for us. We're going to go from there to the Maas River, which is the end of the whole engagement in Holland for us, and we knew that. And but we knew we had to go through the Maas River. They sent over the 414th Infantry, the other regiment, and they got one battalion over and were trying to put the other battalions over. Tanks showed up when they weren't supposed to, and they lost half of their men. And the others half swam back at ones that could, and etc. It destroyed the unit, and everybody was really shocked by that. So 2 nights later, what happened, they called out Company B, Lutnich's group, and we're going to send the whole corps over. We're going to have the 49th British Infantry Division on one, the Polish group division on the other, and 104th in the center, and the whole corps is going to go aboard, and we're going to go all the way to the Maas River without stopping. And that was, we're going to cross over the Maas River, and you keep, and Company B is going to lead it with Captain Lutnich. And so I told a few, I said, boy, man, that sounds like a kind of, going to be a rough kind of night. They gave us a big meal before, too. And we found out that they had a hell of a lot more German soldiers that had been coming in from Germany through this Maas River area because it's right next to it, you see. That's the reason for what Montgomery did with Market Garden, was he thought it would be easier to get into Germany fast that way, you see. No Rhine River, just the Maas River, which was small. So it was a very important sort of thing. We didn't really quite realize it at the time. And the Germans poured in, and tanks and everything else. So it was, we didn't understand when we first started what we were getting into. But as, the first thing is, we got into the boats, which were little things, and they had two people paddling, as I remember, and we had about 6 other people in it. And they had small arms fire and mortar fire and I guess artillery fire. We were moving into we had 2 or 3 men wounded on the before we got over to the other side. And the people wanted to stop in the middle and let us off. Not in the middle, but, you know, before. I said, no, you go all the way through and let these things. We got these wounded men here. We have to get them to the medic. And they had other people wounded from other boats that were going. And so we got the wounded men taken care of, and then we met up with Lutnidge, the company commander, and he said, let's go. And we crossed a big field where we had to jump over. You just couldn't jump over the canals. They were too wide, so you ended up trying to jump, and you ended up getting soaking wet. And I remember that. So we finally got to the street that goes down, the road that goes down this town. And they had a machine gun set up on one end and on the other end, firing down. So everybody bunched up there. And our squad leader told us, Richmond, get your men across. And I kidded him. We were still kidding at that time. I said, you got all the stripes and everything else, you go over first. Instead of me going over. And he was about to really explode and tell me, and I went and stopped everything by crossing over the road real fast. And luckily they were not, they would fire in intervals, you see. And so I was fortunate there. And the rest followed me. So we got over without any, the ones that we saw. When Captain Lutnidge showed up, he said, Richmond, you stay with me now all night. And he said, I don't want to have to say up gun or anything like that. He said, I want you to fire. And if you see Germans, don't wait. And et cetera. I said, well, at night, Captain, I said, I usually fire off a burst and then I roll because I don't want to stay in the same position because they're going to fire into that position. Well, he said, you do what you have to do. He said, but he said, be sure that you get the Germans. About 2 o'clock in the morning, we came to a big, like a dike ahead. And what we could do is dig the holes and then have that buttress there in front of us, which was good. So we stopped there around 2 o'clock in the morning. And we had started about 8 o'clock or something like that. So we dug foxholes because we had to jump off on another attack at 7 in the morning. And the company commanders and all the squads said, we are holed up here, but if anything comes above, you have to wait for Captain Lutnidge to give the command fire or whatever. And he had a big, what they call a 3 or 4 man foxhole that they had dug. And he had himself in it, his runner, and another officer. We lost our officers from sniper fire, and so they sent up one that night, and he came by my foxhole, and I was 6 or 10 feet away, right by Lutnich's. And I had told Captain Lutnich, I said, "Captain, you too far forward." I said, "It's all right, it's a little quiet now, but there are plenty of Germans around." And I said, "Why don't you get in the back?" He said, "I'm forward, and I want to be forward, and I want you forward." And I said, "Well, Captain, well, whatever you say goes," you know. He said, "By the way, you did a good job." He said, I like the way you fire that weapon." And then roll. He got a kick out of that. We were still laughing, I mean, you know. And we were taking casualties by that time, too. And we had medics with us, and they would take care of it, you know. We had some from on the boat, which was the start of it, which is really unusual. We were all set up there, and we were ready to go into an attack at 7 o'clock. And by this time, it's about 4 in the morning, because it took us 2 hours to dig the holes, to reload, to do this, to eat a ration, you know, what stuff that you do like that. And all of a sudden, Lutnich stands up in the foxhole, and he said, there's a company of Germans going to come, and it looked like they're coming right past us. He said, when I give the word fire, I want everybody to fire, but I don't want anybody to fire until I say that. And he's got this whole company strung out. And about 250 men, and he said, we're going to wait till part of them goes, and we get to about the middle where we are, and then they have the end here, and then they had the end over there. So, and he said, Richmond, I want you to really load up with that. He said, you got enough? I said, I got 4 clips of 21 in each one. He said, you don't have more? I said, well, the other man is dead. He was killed. And I said, his body's there, I can go get it. He said, no, I don't want you, that 4 clips will do. So then the people came along, and he stood up and said, fire. And I went out of my hole to get a better shot, and next to the dike, and I fired into him. And I couldn't have been more than about, I'd say, 20 feet from him. And boy, I piled them up. And I took out one clip, which is 21 rounds, put in another clip, fired into them again. They were stacking up there, and boy, crying, you could hear them. And it was a kind of bad scene. And we kept firing, and I used 3 clips. That's 60 some odd whatchcoms, and I must have killed, I'd say, 30 or 40. And we had some wounded in there, and we fired into the cries. Kind of not a nice thing to say. I mean, you have a man probably bleeding to death, and you fire into him, but that was part of it. And then Lutnich said, hold your fire, man, hold your fire. You're firing into the medics coming in, because we had been, by that time the medics were coming in to treat the Germans, they're medics. And the people were firing at the medics. So he said, don't shoot the medics. and etc. So everything got quiet, and the only thing you could hear were the choirs, which were terrible in that still dawn, to hear them moaning and crying, mother and mother, you know, and this, that, and the other. And those same men we've been firing into, you see. So one man came out with the helmet off, and I don't know where in the hell all of a sudden he appears in front of me, and I don't even have time to shoot him, for God's sake. He's hitting the shoulder, and he's coming over, and he's an older man. And so I didn't know what the hell to do with him. I just put him over there, and he didn't have a helmet, he didn't have a weapon, so I didn't know what the hell to do with him. And somebody was over there, a medic, he said, I'll watch him. I said, he's not going anywhere, I don't think. You know, well, that's the reason the Germans didn't know we were there, because we were far ahead of all the rest of them, you see. And it cost them dearly. Well, all of that was fine, and we felt very good about it and everything, and we kind of getting things squared away, and then all of a sudden hell broke loose. My God, small arms fire, mortar fire, artillery fire. Jesus Christ, I got hit in the arm, and what the hell happened? And it kept on. And all of a sudden, one of the shells goes into the big hole. And the new officer that came up and asked me where Lutnich's foxhole was, told him right over there. The other, Lutnich was killed outright. The gopher, or whatever, your wireless man, was killed, and then the new officer, they were the medic was trying to put a sort of a thing to stop the blood, and the wound was bigger than what he was trying to stop the blood with. It was a real mess. I was there because I was right by him, and I said, can I help? And he said, no, Christ. He said, this guy's gone. He said, I can't. And the first thing you know, he died. So they had 3 killed in that hole. And here I am with wounds in my arm, and with all the excitement, I'm not hurt, I'm bleeding, and et cetera. And the medic says, hey, I better take care of you. And he said, you all right? He said, I'm gonna take him out right now. I said, yeah, sure, go ahead, I can hack it. And he gets a sort of a tweezer thing and pulls out 2 or 3 pieces of shrapnel and puts a self on it, puts a little bandage on the whatchamacallit. He said, you're ready. What had happened was they had sent out a company, but they had a whole group of people behind them. I mean, so that's what it was all about. So we were heavily engaged, and it was turning into a firefight and other things. Boy, people were getting wounded on our side and et cetera. It was a real hellish thing, and it was so much going on, it was like daylight. There were so many bullet flashes and mortar flashes and stuff. And I'm hit, and with nothing, which is all right. Captain Lutnich is dead, and I'm the closest one, and the tech sergeant comes over to me, Leaf, and there's no officers, it's just Leaf and myself for the remains of the company. We had taken casualties, and we only had about 50 men left out of the 200. because we had taken them and not been replaced with them, you see. And Leaf said, Richmond, he said, go in that hole and get the papers out, Captain Lutnich's papers. I said, go in the hole with all the blood and the flesh and what's going on? I said, oh, I can't do that. He said, that's an order. You get those papers, we need them. He said, he know where he kept in that sort of like a briefcase like idea. He's got all the stuff for the whole thing. He said, we need them. He said, get your ass in there. So I was trying to do with all the blown, the good and the stuff, see if I could reach down there. He said, get your ass in it. And he said, and you feel a briefcase or something and pull it out. Man, I thought, geez, I'm all bloody and all this stuff and everything, and it's Captain Lutnich stuff. I said, oh my God. And I pulled out the thing, and it's got bones in it. Oh man, it was just a terrible experience, and I was about to throw up. And I said, you can't use these papers. They're not gonna, he said, give them to me. And I said, I need another uniform. I mean, I'm smelling, I could smell the blood and everything, you know? It was just terrible. So the 7 o'clock jump off was canceled, and we didn't leave till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And they sent up another man to take over, and he couldn't hack it the first hour or so. I had to send him back. So that just left me and the tech sergeant. I figured at the time, my God, if they can kill a big man like Captain Lutnich. And boy, I was really fond of him. He was very fond of me, too. Well, actually, the Bronze Star was awarded for that part in Holland. And that was really that night. One of the things that Lutnich told me before, when I told him, Captain, you too far forward, and et cetera, he said, Rich, he said, I want to tell you something. He said, there are going to be plenty of silver stars tonight. He said, you all have done a great job. And he was killed not long after that. And so you had both of them. One of them was Rhineland campaign, one was Northern France. And they just put it exemplary conduct.